Hey, welcome to the MedBix webcast. This is Raman Annam Raju. I'm the host. Ignore those dots. Is coming from we have still a lot of light here in Silicon Valley. Is live from Silicon Valley. This is so. Let me. We have a very interesting, wonderful guest. She's a highly qualified woman, joining from North Carolina. She's MD, PhD. Before that, let me introduce you my co-host, Dr. Susan Davis, joining from Fort Myers, Florida. We've been joining with the different places. This is a great thing about the technology. So let me welcome Dr. Susan Davis to the. Welcome, Susan.
Hi,
Welcome to
Ramon. How
the
are you?
good. So how is things going for you? This is that too much hot up there in Fort Myers? How is the weather?
No, weather's wonderful. It's coming on summer. We're just starting our rainy season. In fact, there's a big thunderstorm coming in right as we speak. I hope my internet stays connected. So it's wonderful, rumbling, lightning, and thunder here in Florida.
Oh, very good. So let me, without, we have a big program today, so we have to talk, particularly we don't get, well, we get some people from PhD in neuroscience and psychiatry is a good combination, actually. We don't get that many. So let me introduce you, our new guest, without further ado. Let me, uh, Dr. Jennie Bryant,
Burn,
Byrne. I'm
Dr.
sorry about that.
Burn.
I'm still a rare combination of medicine, neuroscience, and psychiatry, and healthcare innovation to the world of healthcare leadership. She earned both her MD and PhD in neuroscience, giving her a deep understanding of the biological and physiological, psychological foundations of the human behavior. She is a board certified psychiatrist, entrepreneur, advisor, and a national healthcare leader. Dr. Jenny has worked across clinical care, healthcare startups, population health, and physician mental health. Yeah. She is also the author of the books explaining how brain science shapes human performance and how moral injury, she uses a special word, moral injury, in, instead of burnout, is affecting today's healthcare professionals. Tonight, we will explore ADHD, physician burnout, mental health, healthcare systems, and the human side of medicine. We have to cover a lot of them. Welcome, Dr. Jenny Byrne.
Burn, Dr. Burn.
Dr. Byrne,
Hi,
welcome to the
Dr.
Medbix
Burn.
webcast.
And before you even say anything, we missed your huge accomplishment this week. I believe is it your third or fourth book, but ADHD for professionals just this week.
Yeah, just dropped last Tuesday, so it's just been a week out on the market. So yes, very excited about the third book.
Let,
Very
let,
exciting, and what a topic.
Yeah, that is my really, I love that topic because my children tell me always I'm a ADHD by default. One of the things is I wanted to ask you: is it a byproduct of curiosity, intelligence, or creativity, or ADHD comes? Is it why it is particularly evident in those professionals particularly? What do you think of that? Yeah, before I do that, please give me your background, a little bit
Say
personal background.
hello.
you know
Yeah,
that because I'm very excited about ADHD because I am qualified for that. So
yeah. He's showing us a few.
yeah, my
Doctor,
ADHD, I'm
Doctor,
showing.
Dr. Burns checking the boxes. Probably on both of us before the first
Yeah,
15 minutes are over here.
yeah. Give me
Yeah,
your.
no, thank you for having me. So as you mentioned, I'm trained as a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist. Did not know I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up. I'm actually started out as a musician, changed gears, was a French major, and really didn't discover my passion until late in college when I took a brain and behavior class. So pretty much my whole career has cycled around human brain and behavior in some form or fashion, and it's taken me a lot of very interesting places. But currently, I work as an advisor. I do have a small practice. My practice focuses on taking care of professionals, many of whom have ADHD. So that's been a clinical focus of mine for decades. So excited to share what I've learned over the decades in the latest book.
I love that. Ramona, I have to just quickly, before you get started, because you said something that I can't imagine, Dr. Byrne, you must hear all the time. I mean, people say to me like, oh, wow, do you have ADHD? I mean, do you have ADHD? And we do work with professionals. We work in healthcare. Is that a common, I mean, is that common? Do you hear that a lot? Because I feel like I hear it a lot.
Well, first of all, ADHD is very common in the general population. So, from the research, we think about 5 to 10% of the adult population has the type of brain that's an ADHD brain. And so that's a lot of people.
That's a lot of
10% of
people.
the population is a lot of people. And in my experience in professionals, it's at least that much,
Are you
at
saying
least
is it genetic
10%.
and structural? Are you saying is a genetic behavior that is?
Yeah. So what we know about ADHD is actually, in my interpretation, that ADHD is a brain variant. It is one type of brain. It's very common. And there's probably a very good reason that we have people with this kind of brain. We know that human bodies are diverse, right? Inside of our body, everything is diverse. We're not all the same inside. Even the blood vessels of our wrist are different from person to person. And we learn this in medical school. So ADHD is a type of brain that's probably about 10% of the population. It is highly heritable, so it's
Mm.
genetic. So if you have a kid who has diagnosed ADHD and you're a parent of that kid biologically, pretty good odds it might be you or the other parent that has ADHD. So we know that it's very heritable. It's actually more heritable than other
Mm.
psychiatric conditions like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. So very heritable,
Hmm.
very common. And the name I write in the book, ADHD is a terrible name because it is. It stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Disorder.
And
Disorder.
right, right. So, attention deficit people with ADHD can pay attention. In fact, they can hyper focus when they're passionate about something. Sometimes they pay so much attention to it, it's actually a problem.
Hmm.
So it's really more that they have trouble modulating their attention the way they want to. The second part is hyperactivity. This is a bad name. Not everybody with ADHD brain has hyperactive or impulsive features. And those that do, by the time you reach adulthood, it really typically looks more like restlessness than actual hyperactivity. And then finally, disorder. Um, this is somewhat debated whether we should take a disability approach or a strengths approach to ADHD. I lean on the side of strengths, even though I realize there's good reason why we have the disorder label. But if it's a brain trait, a variant that 10% of the population has, I don't see that as a disorder. I see it as a difference, a neurodiversity, and when put in the right conditions, ADHD brains can really thrive and be a very important contributor to any team, any workplace, or any community.
Their superpower. It could be their superpower.
Can be, yeah. And that's the thing. When you talk to people with ADHD, I interviewed a lot of people for the book and pulled on my experiences. Sometimes it can be a superpower when used the right way, when optimized, when put in the right environment, it can be. But often it has a lot of challenges too. And especially if you're not in a good environment for your brain, it can be very, very challenging and very difficult.
So
So
what is the treatment for this? What is the what kind of a modalities you offer? Is it a behavioral or medical? Is it actually pharmaceutical treatment? What are the options they have?
Yeah, so one of the misinformation out there, one of the myths, I think, is that ADHD equals stimulant medication. So things like Adderall or Ritalin, you hear about this a lot. It's in the news all the time. But those kinds of medicines are only one of many different ways that you can cope with ADHD. There are other medicines out there that are not stimulants. There are electrophysiological treatments, and there's actually a lot coming in that direction where you can kind of train your brain. There are psychotherapies that can be really helpful. And then even just coaching around your environment and how to shape the way you interact with people in your environment can make a huge difference in somebody with ADHD. So there's actually a lot of tools in the toolkit. And unfortunately, people don't realize that. They just think about those medicines that are so well known.
Yeah, I think ADHD, just the letters themselves are thrown around so much so. I mean, in childhood, like, well, look at that one. He can't sit down in class. He's got ADHD. She's got ADHD, and it follows them through life. I feel like in my business, CPR, the word has lost its meaning. I think people say ADHD, and you are now labeled. But like you said, so it seems strange to me. You have ADHD, hyperactivity is not part of every diagnosis. And then one of the treatments is a stimulant. That doesn't make sense. There must be a neuroscience reason behind of the individuals who do show the hyperactivity. Why would a hyperactivity person be treated with a stimulant?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's actually called a paradoxical effect. So like you said, if somebody without an ADHD brain takes a stimulant, they tend to get activated, very high energy, very, hyper, heart rate goes faster, etc. But often somebody with ADHD, you give them a stimulant and they calm down. And by the way, this is not just stimulants. Sometimes this is caffeine. So I had a funny story. A man I saw for diagnosis of ADHD in his 60s, he was very restless. And I asked his wife if he had ever looked different. And she said once he was really calm after he had eaten an entire bag of chocolate covered espresso beans. So if you can imagine how much caffeine is in a bag of espresso beans, he was totally calm. So it has that paradoxical effect. And, in terms of what do we know why that's happening, stimulant medications work typically on dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain. And by enhancing dopamine and norepinephrine, it seems like we can have better top-down control of our attention. So in other words, we can direct attention where we want to direct it when we want to do that. That's how we think stimulants work. But to be honest, as with many things, we really don't always know exactly how these medications work.
So if you're thinking of ADHD as a variant rather than, I love that, by the way. I think that sounds wonderful, because what's the norm, by the way, when it comes to the human body that we're comparing it to? But you mentioned caffeine. Are there ways to help improve focus and clarity through diet with someone with ADHD outside of caffeine?
Yeah, it's a great question. In terms of the things, kind of the, things you can do to take care of yourself that aren't medicine, if you think about typically sleep, diet, and exercise. So it seems like for ADHD, exercise is actually probably one of the most important things. Being physically active, that doesn't mean you have to go to the gym and work out for an hour on a machine. That could just mean that you get up from your desk and walk around the room. It could mean that you are doing stretching, that you're just walking a lot. So physical activity seems to be very important for ADHD. For some people, it's probably that restlessness, that it really helps them manage their restlessness. But there's also some really interesting neuroscience around movement and balance. That actually, by doing certain movement and balance, the cerebellum, which is the back part of our brain, we can train our cerebellum, which looks different in people with ADHD. So there's some interesting stuff about movement. And then sleep is really important. A lot of people with ADHD have a shifted circadian rhythm and show up like a night owl. So their body isn't ready to go to sleep until like 2 in.the.morning. And then it wants to wake up at like 9 or 10 in the morning. Right. And so that's for like some people, if you're like an entrepreneur and you can control your schedule, that might be just fine. But if you have little kids, got to get to school, your job starts at 8 a.m., it's a real problem because your body is out of sync. So helping folks with ADHD figure out how to get their circadian rhythm and their sleep under control, that can make a really big difference. Because if let's say you go to bed at 2, but you wake up at like 6 or 7 because you got to get the kids to school, you might be disrupting your REM sleep, your rapid eye movement sleep. And if you disrupt your REM sleep, you're not allowing your brain to recover at night, and then that might lead to more cognitive problems during the day.
Any relationship between the yoga meditation, is any effect on this in this
Yeah.
kind of a treatment process?
Yeah, definitely. Yoga and meditation are breath, basically like learning how to use your breath and how to observe your mind, doing all of the mind things that our brains like to do. And sometimes by doing that with ADHD, you can train your brain to kind of look at itself in that kind of observer mindset. So definitely can be helpful. The movement in yoga in particular that's connected to breath can be very balancing. And I did want to say, Susan had asked about diet. There is less evidence that certain diets are helpful for ADHD, but having said that, eating well, having good routines, having a good diet is definitely important. But some people ask me, like, is there one food I could eat or one thing I could avoid that would change my ADHD brain? And unfortunately, it doesn't really seem like there's any one thing that you could eat or not eat that would make your ADHD brain be different.
The exercise piece makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ramona.
Yeah, 1 second. I wanted to ask a hyper focus part of it. When I go into that zone, you're one of those people that connect the dots of different fields, right? Healthcare, neuroscience, psychiatry. You're connecting all the dots. That's one thing I saw very rarely, that I connect the dots and able to connect the dots in different fields, physics and medicine and psychology, and all those fields come to the. It's actually coming to me from somewhere I don't even know sometimes. Is that part of the ADHD, or is it a curiosity? Is the part of the byproduct of the ADHD? What is the relationship between all these connecting the dots and ADHD?
It does seem like many people with an ADHD brain are particularly good at seeing things in a different way and connecting the dots in a new way. So whether that's their curiosity or creativity or just the way their brain kind of wanders around and connects things by wandering almost, right? Like it's kind of like a wandering mind. So it might be personality, but it does seem like ADHD brains are good at that in general. And so one of the strengths I hear about frequently from professionals is, like you said, I'm the one that connects the dots. I'm the one that comes up with the new ideas. I'm the one that sees things in a different way than other people. And in my profession, that can be extremely valuable, right? If I'm the one on the team that can come up with these ideas, that can be extremely valuable.
Yeah.
That makes sense, Ramona. That makes a lot of sense. Working beside, in clinical areas myself as a nurse, very linear thinkers, in medicine. This is the problem. This is the diagnosis. This is how we treat it. I can just remember myself coming to the same conclusion, but I do it 100% backwards. I start with the far end and go backwards on everything. Math, I do backwards. And I'm not that diagnosed, but the more I hear and I follow a mind like Ramona's, and I'm wondering, people have said to me, you for sure have it. Of course, I was never diagnosed. So that must be something. I know you did a bunch of interviews of 45, 50 people, or I think somewhere along those lines for your most recent book. Is there a characteristic in the people you interviewed for in these professionals from your most recent book, ADHD? I mean, are there characteristics that bind? I'm gonna say us, thinking I might be one of us. I'm not sure.
Yeah, definitely. There's some common traits. And I'll say just on the last point, full disclosure, I do not have ADHD. I have a kid that's neurodiverse, but I'm also someone very curious and likes to connect the dots. So I think it's not like that type of person always has ADHD, but it is very common. So some of the other things that we see are people who do well in high adrenaline situations. So, for example, my physicians who have ADHD tend to be in the operating room, in the emergency room, or in the intensive care units. They've just naturally selected those careers, right?
Check. Great.
Because they can do very well. Yeah, they can hyper focus in those situations. Their brain it's very happy when there's a lot of adrenaline and a lot of dopamine. So I do see that characteristic a lot. I would say on the whole, The patients I see with ADHD tend to be very hard workers. The professionals with ADHD are very hard workers. And probably part of it is because they don't know they have ADHD. And so they've had to come up with all of these strategies and extra work and extra time to be so successful and so high achieving. So they tend to be actually very, very hard workers. And there's kind of a myth about ADHD people being lazy, and that it couldn't be more further from the truth in my experience.
Let us talk about psychiatry a little bit. You have a DSM manual, is a statistical manual, right? It's a behavioral process. You're statistically. So how do you are you diagnosing ADHD through statistical process, or do you have any clinical evidence there? The strong evidence in the clinical side, like a neuroscience and anatomical side, is a MRI, CT scan. It shows that this particular person has ADHD.
That's a great question. So
Great question.
most people get diagnosed with ADHD through a clinical interview, which is, you talk about your history, what's going on now. That uses that DSM book you mentioned, which is kind of like a checklist style, like, do you meet criteria? So I do that as part of my assessment for ADHD, but I do two other things because I do like neuroscience. I do think it's important to use the science when we have it. So I use two other things. The first is I do a computer test of attention. There are a couple out there. The one I personally like the most is called QB Tech. It's been around for decades. It's out of Europe. And it's a 20-minute computer test you do at home that looks at the way your brain responds to stimuli. And it shows patterns which could be consistent with ADHD. It's not like you have it or you don't, it's not like a blood test or something, but it's pretty darn good. And then the third thing I like to do is an executive function rating scale that's age and gender normed. And what that does is allows me to see how the person is showing up from their perspective, as well as from the perspective of somebody who knows them well. So I put all those three things together. If I have 3 out of 3 that say, yep, looks like ADHD, I'm very confident making the diagnosis. 2 out of 3 look like a yes, I'm pretty confident. If only one of those 3 looks like it's ADHD, I normally say, I don't know if that's what's going on here. I think we need to dig a little bit deeper. So the way I assess is pretty thorough, and it has 3 parts. But again, that's not, unfortunately, the standard of care. Most people are just doing that kind of checklist, which I find leads to a lot of false positives and a lot of false negatives, which is why I don't rely just on that one thing.
That is the reason we cannot replace doctors with AI. Even though whatever the talk in Silicon Valley is. So let me ask you about impact of AI.
I'm sorry, but what about AI? Dr. Byrne, are you
question,
using AI in the diagnosis and or the treatment, or where does AI come in your practice?
Yeah, great question, because I am a futurist. I do like to incorporate technology that I can trust. So what I have used so far for AI, one of the companies I advise is called Psych Now. And we have a custom built platform that does use a proprietary language learning model. And I use it to help me extract a lot of data quickly. So when my patients, before I ever meet them, they spend about half an hour doing a history, which is typed and spoken. And then the AI platform is able to synthesize all of the spoken as well as like what's in the voice, like the emotional content of the voice. And then it shows me a really interesting summary with insights. And then I get the raw responses as well. So I can go back and look at what the person actually said. So that does use some AI. I also use some AI. You heard that I use a 3-part assessment. When I have to do all that manually, it's very time consuming. And that's, leads to slow time for assessment. But I have built a little AI program for myself so that I can ingest all that data within 15 minutes. So if somebody needed help from me and they did all the assessment, I could see them like 30 minutes later. Wow. And I would have everything I needed to make a diagnosis or not. So I've used it to speed up some process of mine that's very manual. And then the third place I use AI is Sometimes my patients will give me a lot of data. Sometimes I use sensor data, like from rings or other things. I'll download a big file and then I'll have a custom AI bot help me digest a ton of data. Like we mentioned sleep. I'll ingest months of sleep data from one of their devices, and then I'll use my AI to ask it questions about the person's sleep habits. So that's how I'm
Fascinating.
using it currently, but I'm always tinkering. Again, it's typically programs that I've written myself, that
Wow.
I trust the most, but I do see that there's some really helpful things out there that AI is doing.
The flip side of the coin for the AI is a AI psychosis. What do you think that is becoming a big problem? I see here in Silicon Valley, this is a becoming an impending danger for the humanity. What is your take on that AI psychosis?
Interesting because people have a lot of irrational false beliefs too. So it's interesting to see the AI come up with irrational false statements that are different than the kinds of irrational false statements that human come up with. Um, one of the bigger problems I see right now is people are using AI for psychotherapy. So they're trying to design AI that will talk to patients and be like a therapist. But one of the big problems is the AI is trained to agree with you
Yes.
because, right, because humans will rate the response like, oh, that was a good response or not. And everybody likes the flattery and responds well to positive. So these AI agents are like agreeing with everything and always saying, yep, you're right. Oh, good job. And in reality, that's not what psychotherapy is at all. It's not just someone sitting there agreeing with you. In fact, sometimes it's disagreeing. Sometimes it's saying, well, I don't know. Let's look at this a different way. I don't know if that's quite accurate. Let's challenge that thought. So to me, that's the biggest danger I have seen right now is like using the chat GPT as your therapist because it could really lead you to some really bad places that you don't want to be in.
Yes. Let us talk about a little bit of healthcare leadership. You are not only just a psychiatrist, or you are also a neuroscientist. On the top of it, you run the healthcare leadership. You did. I was involved with the management a little bit here and there, managing HMOs and IPAs, all those, dealing with a lot of doctors. It is a very different psychological aspects you use, right? So you're dealing with a lot of egoistic. Not, I'm not saying all of them are ego, but you're probably dealing with a lot of overconfident, sometimes egoistic, or sometimes very nice, all kinds of people. How do you apply that your leadership quality? Where is your where that helps you, that your psychology and neuroscience background?
Yeah, leadership is really hard. Healthcare leadership in particular, I think, is really hard because of the complexities and some of the systematic problems, which is kind of
Mhm.
more the topic of my second book. But, there are different leadership styles out there, and some leaders are right for the right situation. My style is to lean into who I am as a person, and really lean into my values. So, obviously, I really value humanism. I really value empathy. I really value honesty. Um, I really lean into the things that matter to me, and I'm very curious. So typically as a leader, when I run into things that are hard, because there are a lot of hard things, I really try to like turn on my curiosity
Hmm.
about the other person. So, managing doctors, we are like really hard to manage. We are notoriously difficult to manage. I am difficult to manage.
Yeah.
And that's kind of complicated, the reasons why, right? Like we tend to have core values around autonomy and respect and responsibility and these ethical codes that some people just don't understand. So I try to, as a leader and teaching other leaders, is like lean into your empathy and really try to understand the other person and where they're coming from and what their values are. And if you can align around values, typically you can really make progress working together. So I guess the answer is I try to lean into my training as a therapist, which is also just my nature, which is I'm kind of curious and empathetic. And that's my style of leadership. I'm not like a very command and control type of leader. And, try to make sure where I work and act as a leader, that I'm in a place that needs that style of leadership at that time, because it's not always the right style of leadership for the organization at that time.
And now add a little ADHD. So I'm thinking about your just most recent book, Professionals with ADHD. So you just listed all of those magnificent characters that you hold dear and at the forefront of your practice. But I was thinking while you were speaking of the professionals who now are in those positions, perhaps with similar characteristics, with undiagnosed ADHD, and they're trying to, you know, maintain ship shape operation, but without support, with an undiagnosed ADHD. And so here you come. So I can see how your most recent book would be an incredible resource for that leadership, those C-suiters, those professionals who are on the daily trying to maybe tuck it away. Or I wonder if there's shame involved with a diagnosis like ADHD, one that you're in your 60s, like you, and in a professional manner. So how do you help them with that?
Yeah, there is a lot of shame, but not for everybody. It's been interesting. Some folks, when they get the diagnosis, do have that shame, and then others don't at all. So again, everybody is a little different. But what I find again with the professionals is, on the surface, things look okay to other people. So whatever they're doing to make everything look okay on the surface is typically where the problem really lies. So it's very common for a CEO or an entrepreneur, you know, at work, things are kind of looking okay, but it's actually like when they go home that everything falls apart. They use all of their cognitive energy to mask or to do things at work, and then at home things fall apart. That's actually a really common thing that people
Yes.
don't talk about. They think about ADHD and like working and, you know, getting tasks done and paying attention. And these professionals have often learned ways to do that, but they're very high effort, very high masking, and then they go home and they're a mess. And their relationships are impacted. They don't feel like they're a good parent. Their house is a mess. They're having emotional meltdowns, because emotional regulation is also a big part of ADHD. And that's another thing we don't talk about much, is the ADHD brain, and how emotions can be big and emotions can be quick to flare up or flare down. And it can look like all sorts of things, but sometimes it's really just the way your ADHD brain is working.
Let us talk about the vulnerable population. You worked with the vulnerable population. I did, you know, one of the things that I did in Atlanta when I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, for the vulnerable population, very, you know, inner city youth, I introduced a program with a virtual reality and a neurofeedback system. You know, I put it's called the Neuro Cafe. I introduced a woman. She started that program. It is very widely successful now. Actually, it is working very good. You know, so it is like a Neuro Cafe lab. It is with a VR and a virtual, like a 6 stations of VR and then neurofeedback. You know, there's a games. They play the games. You know, that's really helpful. Do you think what is the technology's role here? Actually, particularly virtual reality role.
Yeah, so there is an FDA cleared game to help kids with ADHD already on the market. And there are other neurophysiological tools coming that give you that biofeedback to help you train your brain to pay attention the way you want it to. So it's a very exciting field. There's actually a new device. I don't have it. I think I'm on the wait list to get it. It's headsets, like headphones that have an EEG in them.
Yes,
I don't know
yes.
if you've seen these. Yeah, and
Yeah, I
so we'll
use
be
that one.
we'll be able to start using a headset with EEG. I think there's also some glasses that have EEG in them now coming to
Yes,
market. And then we'll be able to design ways to train or observe your brain waves in real time.
yes.
So I think that's super exciting.
Yeah.
You know, they have some devices on market now, for example, that are on your vagal nerve, right? They stimulate patterns of electrical activity for your vagal nerve to help your parasympathetic nervous system. All of this stuff is really cool. I'm an electrophysiologist. Actually, that's what my PhD was in the
Oh, really?
electrophysiology of attention.
Oh,
And so it was something, if you go back in the history of medicine and psychiatry, it was actually quite popular. in the first part of the 20th century, these different electrophysiological treatments. But then, as with many things, there started to be people with sham treatments and, people with
Yeah.
malintent, and it got a bad rap. And then ECT got a bad rap in the media with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and other things. And so kind of fell out of favor. But I think it's kind of coming back now as people are maybe interested. They're looking for things that aren't just pills and chemicals. I think people are interested in other treatments. So I'm excited. I think these things are coming back. The next like 5 years, I think should be really interesting to see what comes to market.
Dr. Byrne, one of the things that I missed about the autonomic function is actually a lot of cardiologists now say that actually cardiovascular problems are caused by autonomic dysfunction. Is really it's a new kind of way of looking at the cardiology Susan does every day. So what is it that your take on that?
Yeah, so I think the brain body connection is fascinating, right? And so a lot of the people I see, it's very common with ADHD to have anxiety together, especially if your ADHD has been untreated. So
Mm.
what I find a lot with folks is that their sympathetic nervous system is on overdrive and they're not balancing it with parasympathetic for a variety of reasons. And then that being out of whack is leading their brain to think about their body and feel their body and then develop anxiety about what they're feeling in their body. So I'm working with a couple patients right now with ADHD who have gone through a physical illness, and they were doing okay with their ADHD. They're professionals, they were doing okay, but they got ill. And once they got ill, they started to notice the functioning of their body and they got anxious. And now their sympathetic system is on overdrive and they don't know how to rebalance, and they're hyper focusing on their body.
Yeah.
And so they don't respond to normal treatments for anxiety because it's actually almost more like a hyper focus state where they're constantly scanning and interpreting the sensations in their own body. It's really interesting.
Very interesting. I think that goes back to down regulating the sympathetic nervous system via walking, movement, tapping. I've been reading so much about tapping.
Yes, I've been
lately.
learning about that a little bit recently too.
Some really neat research on tapping, and it really works so quickly. It's very interesting.
Is it a sound therapy? Is it a sound therapy? Is a very one of the things people.
Sure.
I have some friend of mine in Atlanta. She was a very pioneer in the sound therapy. So, what do you think of that? What do you?
Well, I'm a musician, I mentioned earlier. And so, I'm also electrophysiologist. So the thinking about music and sound waves and brain waves has always been very interesting to me. I do recommend for my patients, I don't normally recommend the sound bathing kind of rooms. Just most people don't have access to that. But what I do recommend is binaural music
Yeah.
for anxiety or for focus. Not not everybody responds to it, but people who are musicians, I don't know, people are musicians, people whose brains respond
Yeah.
to music,
Yeah.
really seem to do well with binaural. And it's nice because they can put that on at work, put it in their headphone. It's very subtle, or they can even have it sitting on their desk at a low volume. It doesn't need to be loud, but it's having your brain react to the rhythms underlying the music. So I do recommend that pretty frequently.
I interviewed Dr. Alexander's wife. She does produce a binaural beats. My
Good.
son is a neuroscience graduate. He is also he is a musician. What he is doing is he's kind of doing a research that binaural beats in the rap music. The kids they love rap music, right? So he's trying to find the binaural beats that produce. This is a binaural beats are the mind creation, right? The brain creates that beats is not really is not coming from the real life, right? That's what I understand.
I don't know the engineering behind it, to be totally honest with you, but it's very when and I do use this myself. I think binaural music is very helpful for me. I do find that it's like very subtle, and I'll have it on very low volume, but it really does seem to resonate with my brain and like help it settle. So I don't know all the engineering behind it, but I've seen it be effective for myself, and it's for, if you have Spotify, whatever, you can get it for basically for free, and you can use it at work. So I often recommend to try it and see if it's helpful.
It's helpful, yeah. Excellent. So let us talk about, I'm going to, everybody thinks psychology and the psychiatry and the neuroscience is a mysterious. I'm going to present a mysterious topic, if you don't mind, for 10 minutes and 15 minutes about this. Navya, can you put that one? Is about mirrors. A lot of people, this is you can comment anytime. You may know a lot more than I do, Dr. Byrne. Just I'm going to give you a little bit of a physics side of it that you can fill up the clinical side of it if it is I'm missing something. Mirrors are, we look at the mirror at the glance, we glance at it, but it's a deep mystery is embedded with the mirrors. In physics, we learned quite a bit in the early days of the, light. When we study sound and light, we are really fascinated about the mirrors. Why? This is where reality and perception just a blur there, a line here. Let me explain to you what that means. One of the biggest perception, even the highly educated people think the mirror reverses the left and right, it flips the left and right, but in fact it's not. It is not. It doesn't reflect the left and right. It is actually reverses the depth, and the mind creates the left and right. It's an absolute illusion that mind created by my brain. Brain fills up that gap. They don't know how to do that. Is it evolutionary? Could be. I don't know much about it, but the brain fills up that gap and makes it as a left and right, front and back. It is actually reverses the depth. This is a big. It is actually a lot of people. It is actually reflection is a physical. What mirror does is a constant. It is just reflects the photons. It reflects the light rays. That's all it does. But brain creates the psychological aspect of the flip. The flip is created by psychological aspect of the brain. A lot of that is a very strange in the everyday mirror what we observe. So it is one of the classic mysteries that we see every day. That is the physics of this. But there is a John Walters that he used to sell in 1990s. I remember he was selling the true mirror. He made the flip correction, the rectangular, two mirrors he put together. And actually, people did not like it. Honestly, they don't want to see the exact. They did not like the actual image of themselves. They like the flip because the evolutionary. One of the things is I always say that I used to freeze in front of camera when I see myself. I asked somebody, evolutionary biologist, is it possible that in the process, we are never seeing ourselves? There are no mirrors, so we only see other people. When we see our results, we get stalled. We don't know where to put our results. It's possible, he said. I was surprised about that, but it is interesting concept. So, with the training, we can always overcome that. But that's why one of the reasons we can. So let us enter into the mirror medicines. The doctors, both of them may know very well than me. The molecules look exactly same. The chemistry looks outside, the structure of the molecules look same, but one body says that they're different. The mirror molecule and then the left-handedness and right-handedness are entirely different for biology. One is therapeutic, other is a harmful actually, or a different purpose. One of them is, as you know, thalidomide, right? That used to be for the morning sickness for a pregnant woman. Now it became a birth defect for certain woman because of the mirror thalidomide worked a very tragic consequences with that. So we learned about the chirality. This is called chirality in chemistry, and enantiomers, they call, the different names. Ketamine, for example, is not a bad. Ketamine is used for anesthetic, and then mirror ketamine is called esketamine. They use for the non-resistant depression. Dr. Byrne is probably expert in that area. I'm not, but that's one of them. So, for example, acid reducer, omeprazole, Omeprazole is another drug that's mirror reflection is an axiom. But omeprazole is a broad spectrum kind of acid reducer. The Nexium works on a particular thing at less dosage. They both have pros and cons, So, but it's a mirror molecule. Omeprazole and Nexium are mirror molecules of each other. So they use for different purposes. A lot of medicines could be used. The mirror molecules can be used for different purposes. We don't know yet. A lot of them we need to investigate. There's a new kind of medicine coming up. But there is a mystery there is a more mystery in the mirrors. I tell you, what is that? In the classical world, if you see in the mirror, regular mirror is a pure reflection. But you can become all of a sudden, it can become a quantum object, a quantum world you can get into. If you put a black suit on the mirror, so all the light rays become a probabilistic. That means they can reflect, they can absorb, or they can divert all at the same time. All possibilities without your intervention, they can do one of those things once you measure. That is, a black suit mirror becomes a quantum object. Very strange. It is a when we learn in the physics, we get surprised how simply a object in the classical world becomes immediately into the quantum world. So it is actually, the moment you see is uncertainty comes in is a part of it. Is not uncertainty is not in the system. It is a nature itself. That is the part of the process. Part of the probabilistic nature is the part of the nature. It is not. You cannot say you absorb this photon, you can reflect this photon, or they cannot measure. You cannot predetermine which way it goes, the photon, the light ray. So that just simply coding the mirror becomes a quantum object is a fascinating object. The little bit more quantum side of it is actually quantum mirrors. The reflection is, if you have ultra cold atoms, they reflect before they touch the surface. It's just a cause and effect, a little bit confusing here. And a cause and effect can be actually is a wave mechanics comes in the picture, but in the real world, the quantum wave can reflect before it touches the surface. That is one of the quantum phenomena there. But so mirror neurons is another aspect of class of neurons. Dr. Byrne know a lot more than I do. This is the empathy neurons and compassionate neurons. This is where mother and a child can relate to, and with by empathetic neurons, they kind of emulate the neurons from each other. That's a very powerful the discovery by Italian scientists. Then Dr. V.S. Ramachandran is from my hometown in Hyderabad, in India, but he is a San Diego Scripps Institute. He wrote a book, A Phantom of the Brain. He wrote a book, and he was very popularized this mirror neurons concept, actually. And then he also suggested that you can use a mirrors besides a mirror neurons, the popularized mirror neurons concept, and also said that you can use actual mirrors to treat the phantom limb pains. That is an illusion. He can create a phantom limb pains and use it in his practice. He's a neurologist, actually. He's a practicing neurologist. He's getting older. Actually, I don't see him nowadays anymore. He's a retired, looks like. But that he was the trailblazer in that one, like Dr. Byrne. So mind can change the body. That's a mirrors. The mirrors we look at every day, it is standard. The reality and perception at the border, is on the boundary of reality and the perception, that we see every day. So that's why I wanted to bring that. It is a more closer to the Dr. Byrne's studies. She can tell me. Thank you for watching. Let me bring her back. Yeah. What do you know more about than I do?
No, I just learned some really interesting stuff there. Thank you for sharing. I'm so glad you had the mirror neurons, because that was something I actually was very interested in way back in my undergrad days. I was very interested in mirror neurons. And I think, and maybe you saw this in your research, I learned a couple things about how brain processes images. And one of the really interesting things is when we tell stories, when humans tell stories, the person listening to the story, their brain gets activated in the same way as the person telling the story. So, we all know about the power of telling stories for humans and how that really matters for us. It's because probably we're activating some mirroring. And what's even more interesting is with our current technology, that doesn't have to be synchronous. So somebody could be listening to this recording at a different time, and their brain could be activating the way our brain is activating as we're speaking together.
Interesting.
So I thought that was really interesting. And then the other thing your presentation brought to mind was when I was researching my first book on working, like in the new ways of working and hybrid work, I read a lot of research about video calls and why they were creating so much fatigue and so many bad emotions for people. And it had to do with the unnatural visual stimuli that they're getting. So when, right now I'm seeing myself on camera. If I were in a meeting, I would actually turn myself off because it's very difficult to have a picture of yourself. It's very unnatural and it's distressing.
Yeah.
And it actually raises your sympathetic nervous system and your cortisol level. So people who are on Zoom calls all day long, who are looking at themselves all day long, it's actually very distressing. And when you had, remember, people were looking at Zoom screens with like 100 faces on them, that is extremely distressing for your brain. That's like, you're an animal in the jungle and there's like 100 lions staring at you. It's really, and so I was learning a lot about how looking at other people in unnatural ways, one of which is a mirror, right? Like that feels unnatural. It really is distressing and it can affect your body in really negative ways. So when we're using this technology, being thoughtful about when we're on video and how we use video as opposed to audio, which is much less distressing. So if you remember back in the day, you maybe had a conference call and you'd have a lot of people on a conference call. That wasn't quite so taxing and distressing to your brain as video. So I learned a lot about that for the first book, but this was fascinating. I didn't know some of the things that you shared about mirrors.
Thank you.
It sure was. And Dr. Byrne, you just mentioned earlier, you said you were human-centered everything, and as are we. But you think about it, all of this time on these screens, looking at yourself and that the animals coming at you, and then you go to finally you go to a conference and you're around people again, and it is extraordinary how much more, I'll speak for myself, the connection is so profound when we finally get together with our humans and communicate not through a screen and not with 400 people staring at us. It's been dramatic for me.
It is, but it's also interesting because we talked about neurodivergence and different kinds of brains. For people who have autism and autism style brains, many of them would be very distressed to be in person with a lot of people. So certain brains under certain, conditions do very well, but then somebody else's brain might actually find that scenario very distressing and exhausting. Or kind of introvert extrovert. Like I'm actually believe it or not, I'm a pretty introverted person, but I love being with other people, but I find it very tiring. So for example, I have to limit the amount of conferences I go to. I'm very picky about going to a conference because it does drain me. Even though I love it, I'm still like totally exhausted afterwards. And so that's how my brain is. So it is interesting, right? But I do think that something about a human connection is different than a technology. And I don't know, maybe someday technology can connect in that way. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't rule it out, but I certainly haven't seen it yet.
What do you think of healthcare professional burnout? You say moral injury, you use a different word for it. I don't know why you use that. So tell us. So, I interviewed a lot of doctors, and one of the things that, they think that they're treated and they have this burnout system, and they want to treat other people. It's a big challenge, and I'm getting confused about that a little bit, about what their take on this. What is overall burnout among healthcare professionals?
Burnout on the word burnout, I think.
Yes, that's a chapter in my second book. It's called I'm Burned Out on Burnout. Yeah, just real briefly. So to summarize the topic, burnout is a word that's used too much now, right? It's kind of lost meaning, but it was really designed to explain a sense of physiological or mental exhaustion, where you could take a vacation, take a break, get replenished, get refreshed, and come back and be okay. Kind of like a light bulb. A light bulb burns out, take it out, get a new one, charge it up, put it back in, good to go. That's not really what's happening in healthcare. Yes, there is exhaustion for sure, but what we're seeing is often this other concept, which is moral injury. So just briefly, moral injury is when three things happen. It's when you witness, are part of, do something, or cannot stop something that goes against your values. That it is either ordered or condoned by someone superior to you, and that the stakes are high.
Wow.
So the concept comes from the military, but in healthcare, we feel like the stakes are high, right? Like we're trained to be perfectionist. Doctors, nurses, people feel like they need to be perfect. So the stakes are high. And the current healthcare system often makes doctors and other clinicians feel like they can't do what they were trained to do. They can't take good care of their patients. They don't have enough time. They don't have the resources. You have to do prior authorizations. You have to do documentation. So many things that get in the way of you living your values as a professional clinician. And so it's like these wounds on your soul.
Gosh.
And they can be a lot of tiny little wounds, or they can be one big wound. Sometimes, for example, I talk about in that book, I share my painful story. I had a medical board investigation, and it was so painful. I did consider leaving medicine. It turned out, I didn't really get in trouble. Nothing bad happened to me. It went away, but it was so painful to be investigated for something I was very proud of. That was so painful. That was like a moral injury for me.
Yeah.
So if, we could go more into the topic maybe on another conversation, but it is different than burnout. It is different.
Yeah. You know what? That's the definition, the three-tiered definition you just gave. I've never heard that. That's extremely poignant, and your example from your personal career. And I know in nursing is really at a level right now, the moral injury in nursing to a point where suicide is an extremely high rate and probably across healthcare professions. But I know I can speak for nursing, and it's not my area of expertise. But this is certainly too powerful of a topic to close our show with. You'll have to come back, and we'll have to speak more about it.
Yeah, or get the book. You can read about it. That's my second book. Came out about 2 years ago.
Yeah, your book is called ADHD for Professionals, right? That book is available
number 3
on Amazon.com.
That's the new one.
Yep. You can get it on Amazon. If you want to get some free resources on ADHD, my website is constellationpllc.com. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. That's pretty much where I post everything. And YouTube. Those are the two places.
Excellent.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Byrne. You really enlightened all of us with your background and interesting take on all of the areas of neuroscience, psychology, physiology, and including me, therapeutic for me. Thank you so much. It's truly an honor and a privilege to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
thank you so very much. Pleasure to meet you. And I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, good night, all of you.